At the bottom of the world, where the wind screams like a living thing and the sky feels close enough to touch, a continent of ice presses down on itself with the weight of forever. Layer upon layer, century upon century, the frozen silence grows heavier. And deep beneath that crushing calm, hidden spaces are forming. Vast, invisible chambers born not of air, but of pressure. What if Antarctica is not just a graveyard of ancient snow, but a living machine, quietly shaping structures no human was meant to see? What if the most powerful architecture on Earth is being built without hands, without blueprints, without witnesses? If mysteries like this ignite something inside you, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss what lies beneath the surface of our world. The wind reaches Antarctica long before any living thing ever could. It races across the high interior, gathering speed over thousands of empty miles before crashing into the coast with a voice that sounds like the planet itself exhaling. There are no trees to break it, no cities to soften it, no walls to turn it aside. Only ice, endless, blinding, absolute. Here, the cold does not simply surround you. It presses into you. It becomes weight. It becomes law. Above, the sky is a hard, pale blue, distant and indifferent. Below, the ice stretches downward for kilometers, a continent not of land, but of frozen time. Antarctica is not built the way other places are built. It did not rise through fire or tear itself upward through colliding plates. It accumulated. It waited. Snow fell in delicate silence, one storm at a time, one century at a time. Soft crystals drifted down onto earlier layers, burying yesterday beneath today, the present beneath the deepening archive of the past. Over years, over thousands of years, the fragile became compact. Air was squeezed out. The snow hardened into fern and fern into ice. What was once light and noisy in its descent became dense and mute in its compression. The continent grew not by eruption, but by persistence. With every passing millennium, the burden increased. Each new layer carried the full history of everything beneath it. The pressure at the base of Antarctica's ice is not a number easily imagined by the human mind. It is the steady, unrelenting force of a mountain range made of frozen water. It never rests. It never releases. It does not arrive as impact, but as permanence. Grain by grain, crystal by crystal, the ice reshapes itself under its own mass. What once shattered at a touch now flows like a slow, grinding river, not because it is warm, but because the weight above demands movement. From the surface, Antarctica appears motionless. The horizon does not change. The ridges of snow hold their shape for months, sometimes for years. But below that illusion of stillness, the ice is alive with pressure and strain. It creeps. It deforms. It groans along invisible lines of stress. Entire glaciers, wider than cities and deeper than skyscrapers are tall, slide inch by inch toward the ocean, driven only by gravity and the colossal load piled onto their backs. This is not the quick violence of earthquakes or storms. This is the violence of patience. Human beings arrived here as intruders into a world that had been forming without witnesses for millions of years. We came wrapped in steel and fuel, in layers of fabric and ambition. We planted research stations like small, fragile islands of warmth in a frozen infinity. And then we began to drill. Our machines bit downward through meters of ice, then hundreds of meters, then thousands. Each core pulled back to the surface was a frozen timeline bands of ancient snowfall compacted into transparent blue cylinders, carrying trapped bubbles of prehistoric air. We learned to read those bubbles like messages sealed in glass. We learned how cold the world once was, how warm it had ever been, how the atmosphere itself had breathed across ages. But the deeper we drilled, the more the story changed. The ice at the surface is young as far as geology is concerned. But near the base, near the interface where ice meets rock, Time stretches into the unimaginable. The crystals down there are crushed into shapes born of stress rather than snowfall. They are aligned, twisted, reformed. Pressure turns their rigid order into something that almost flows. In some regions, the ice grows warm enough by Antarctic standards to soften and slip. A few degrees below freezing, under kilometers of load, becomes a world of slow distortion. It is here, in this realm of crushing weight and creeping motion, that the simple idea of solid begins to dissolve. Pressure does not only compress, it reorganizes. It forces matter into new behaviors, new arrangements, new compromises between strength and surrender. And when the balance becomes imperfect, when layers shear instead of sliding cleanly, when buried ridges force the ice to bend instead of sink, voids can begin to form. Not empty spaces in the ordinary sense, but stress-born hollows sculpted by force itself. Scientists did not first imagine these hidden spaces by sight. They sensed them like echoes in the dark. Radar pulses sent downward returned with subtle delays. Seismic waves passed through the ice and came back altered, slowed, scattered. Instruments recorded minute anomalies, places where the uniform story of solid ice broke into silence. At first, the readings seemed like error, like noise in the signal. But as the data grew, so did the pattern. Something beneath the surface was interrupting the expected order of things. To stand on Antarctica is to stand on ignorance measured in kilometers. Beneath lies a vertical world no human will ever walk through. Stacked universe, weight and memory, silent motion. Every take adds a fraction of a gram below, joining the cumulative pressure of millions of years. Continent does not enter. It absorbs them. And yet, despite its stillness, Antarctica is not passive. The weight of its ice is not merely the consequence of the past. It is the engine of the present. It is the force that bends, fractures, and rearranges the hidden interior of the frozen continent. Somewhere far below the surface, where darkness is absolute and pressure is law, the ice is quietly giving way to spaces born not of emptiness, but of collapse. The deeper the ice sinks beneath its own history, the more alien its behavior becomes. Near the surface, Antarctica deceives with simplicity. Snow falls, wind sculpts it, cold preserves it. But far below, where sunlight has never traveled and human sound cannot penetrate, the rules transform. At depths where pressure rivals that at the bottom of the deepest oceans, ice no longer shatters like brittle glass. It bows. It sighs. It shifts its internal geometry and becomes something between a solid and a slow, viscous tide. Time itself seems to stretch in these depths, each movement measured not in seconds or seasons, but in centuries. Here, pressure is not a momentary force. It is an inheritance. Every layer carries the full burden of everything that has ever fallen before it. Millimeter upon millimeter of ancient snowfall becomes kilometers of compressed mass. The lowest layers are not simply old. They are imprisoned by weight, held in a state where escape is impossible and change is mandatory. The ice must adapt or break, and in adapting, it reshapes the hidden world beneath Antarctica into forms no human architect could design. Beneath the polar plateau, the bedrock is not smooth. Mountains lie buried under the ice, their peaks flattened by pressure, but their shapes still guiding the slow movement above. Valleys, ridges, and ancient fault lines carve resistance into the base of the frozen sheet. As the ice is forced to flow over this uneven skeleton of stone, stress concentrates in specific regions. Layers stretch thin over ridges. They fold into themselves over buried depressions. They grind and shear where opposing flows collide. In these tortured zones, the pressure becomes uneven and tense in one direction, releasing in another. It is in these quiet imbalances that the first seeds of hidden voids are born. Air that was once trapped in falling snow becomes increasingly compressed as depth increases. Most of it is forced into microscopic pockets no wider than a grain of sand. But in rare circumstances, where deformation is severe and layers tear or fold back upon themselves, these microscopic prisons can merge. Pressurized gases, ancient and inert, find brief refuge in newly formed cavities. At first, these spaces are small, fragile bubbles clinging to existence against millions of tons of surrounding force. Most collapse almost instantly, crushed back into invisibility, but some persist. Some grow. Temperature plays its own secret role in this buried drama. Antarctica is the coldest place on Earth at the surface, yet deep below, walls see upward from the planet's interior. Geothermal heat, faint but relentless, rises through the bedrock and kisses the base of the ice. In certain regions, this heat is enough to bring the ice to the edge of it's a liquid in an aromatic sense, but into a softened state where molecules loosen their rigid grip. Here, the ice slips more easily, flows faster, it stretches thinner. Ice thins under strain. Pressure nearby intensifies to compensate. Again, imbalance. Again, the birth of instability. The instruments humans deploy to study this world are blind messengers, reaching downward through kilometers of frozen darkness. Radar waves dive into the ice and return as faint whispers. Seismic surveys send vibrations that travel like artificial heartbeats through the continent. Satellites watch from above, measuring movements so subtle they are smaller than a human fingernail across an entire year. And slowly, from these fragmented voices of data, a picture begins to emerge, one of a vast interior shaped not only by compression, but by absence. Voids are not something the human mind expects to find under such overwhelming weight. Intuition says pressure should erase space, not create it. And yet, physics allows for paradox. Where materials deform unevenly, where stresses pull in opposing directions, space can momentarily survive. In Antarctica, these spaces are likely rare, unstable, and short-lived on geological timescales. But short-lived beneath the ice still means decades, centuries, sometimes longer. Long enough to matter. To imagine one of these hidden cavities is to abandon every familiar sense of scale. There is no light, no sound as we understand it. The walls are not stone but living crystal under constant stress, rearranging themselves even as they appear motionless. The air, if any remains, is ancient beyond comprehension, sealed away since before the rise of human civilization. Temperature, pressure, and silence converge into an environment that feels less like a place and more like a condition. And yet, these voids are not merely geological curiosities. They are symptoms of a deeper truth, that Antarctica is not simply a frozen monument to the past. It is a dynamic, stressed, evolving system, constantly negotiating the impossible weight it carries. Every pressure dome, every nascent cavity, every subtle collapse is a small expression of a massive interior conversation between gravity and resistance, between accumulation and collapse. Above this hidden world, storms continue to sweep across the surface. Snow continues to fall, adding quietly to the burden. The winds erase footprints within hours, as nothing ever crossed the ice. But the weight of each storm remains forever. It sinks into the continent and joins the slow machinery beneath. With every new layer, pressure grows. With every increase in pressure, the chance of balance rises. And with every imbalance, the hidden architecture of Antarctica becomes a little more complex, a little unstable, a little more alive. Somewhere in the darkness below, unseen and measured, a pocket of space is being born or is already dying. The ice above does not tremble. The surface does not crack. The world does not notice. Yet the silent continent takes another internal breath, reshaping itself from within. The formation of these hidden spaces is not dramatic. There is no single moment of rupture that announces their arrival. Instead, they emerge the way most profound changes in Antarctica occur quietly, incrementally, beneath a silence so complete it feels eternal. A layer thins under strain. Another stretches past its strength. Two planes of ice slide past one another by a distance no human eye could ever detect. And in that fractional surrender, pressure briefly loosens its grip. Space is allowed to exist. But space beneath kilometers of ice is not freedom. It is a temporary negotiation with annihilation. The surrounding mass presses inward from every direction, testing the strength of the void's fragile boundaries. The ice around it deforms, creeps inward, and sometimes refreezes in new patterns that partially stabilize the cavity. In this way, a pressure dome is not a static room but a living balance, a tension between collapse and survival, held in place by the endlessly shifting physics of the deep. There are places beneath Antarctica where the ice flows faster, through valleys carved into bedrock long before the first ice age ever began. In these deep channels, entire rivers of ice move toward the sea, accelerated by gravity and lubricated by films of meltwater at their base. Shear here behaves differently. It stacks, spreads, concentrates. Where faster flow with slow flows, stress knots into invisible choke points. It is in these stress waters that the internal structure of ice becomes most unstable, and where voids are most likely briefly invisible. Radar images of these regions do not show clean lines. They show distortion bands of reflection that bend, scatter, and sometimes vanish altogether. To a trained eye, these gaps in signal are not emptiness but disruption. Something is interfering with the normal storytelling of ice. Something is interrupting the expected pattern of density and continuity. These absences are not proof, but they are hence quiet signatures of spaces that do not wish to be found. The deeper scientists probe, the more they confront a difficult truth. Antarctica's interior cannot be fully mapped. Not in lifetimes, not perhaps ever. The scale overwhelms instruments as surely as it overwhelms imagination. Kilometers of ice swallow signals, blur resolution, and turn precision into approximation. What we know is filtered through noise and distance and interpretation. Beneath every conclusion lies uncertainty. Beneath every model lies an unobserved reality still shaping itself in the dark. And yet, even with all these limits, one fact becomes unavoidable. The ice sheet is not a uniform block. It is layered, scarred, folded, fractured, and in rare places, hollowed. The existence of pressure-borne spaces is not an anomaly. It is a consequence of how matter behaves when subjected to impossible load over impossible time. Time in Antarctica does not move at the surface. A century of human history is a blink in the life of the ice. Empires have risen and collapsed while the lowest layers shift a meter. And as time stretches so slowly in these depths, instability can build without resolution. Stress can accumulate generation after generation, waiting for conditions that now release. A change in surface temperature, a shift in subglacial flow, the faint pulse of geothermal heat rising from below. Any of these can tip the balance and transform a stable cavity into a collapsing one, or allow a collapsing one to persist just a little longer. What collapses beneath the ice does not always stay beneath it. The internal failures of Antarctica can, over long distances and long timescales, influence the surface above. A collapsing void may subtly alter the pressure distribution in the layers overhead. That redistribution can change how quickly ice flows downstream. It can redirect stresses toward an ice shelf kilometers away. It can, in slow motion, help determine which regions of the continent remain stable and which are destined to fracture and slide into the sea. Standing on the surface, no human can feel this hidden tension. The ice beneath your feet feels solid, permanent, immutable. But permanence is an illusion here. Everything in Antarctica is in negotiation with gravity. Everything is being tested by weight. Even the most ancient ice, trapped since before human memory began, is still being asked to adapt, to shift, to survive the burden of its own existence. The don't endure it all, for only by obeying the same rule that governs everything else. Change is inevitable. Collapse is patient, and silence is never still. Somewhere below, in the deep architecture of the frozen continent, a balance is tipping. All is thinning. A battery is yielding. The ice is deciding, slowly and without witnesses, what must remain and what must give way. The scientists who work here learn time to listen for what cannot be heard. Instruments tremble with signals too small for the senses, and from those tremors, meaning is drawn. A fluctuation in velocity deep within a glacier. A faint delay in a radar reading. A subtle warping of the surface that repeats year after year. Each of these is a syllable in a language Antarctica speaks only pressure and motion. To study this continent is not to observe it directly, but to interpret its distant reflections, like watching shadows instead of the thing that casts them. Every hidden void beneath the ice is a record of imbalance. It is what happens when the orderly stacking of millennia is disturbed by the stubborn irregularities of the world below. Rock resists where ice wishes to flow. Heat rises where cold demands rigidity. Gravity pulls with a certainty that never relaxes. These forces do not cancel one another. They argue. And in their argument, the structure of the ice becomes complicated, imperfect, and briefly hollow. Deeper layers remember pressures that no longer exist at the surface. Know that fell in ancient ice ages was heavier, denser, colder than the snow now. Buried deep below, that ancient ice retained stress signatures of vanished clouds. Its crystals were forged under conditions that will never return in quite the same way. And yet, those old stresses still contribute to the present. They mingle with the weight of modern snowfall. They interact with new patterns of heat and flow. The ice is not simply a stack of years. It is a conversation across time, where the past continues to press against the present. To imagine the true mass of Antarctica is to step beyond human intuition. If the entire ice sheet were removed in a single instant, the land beneath would rebound upward by hundreds of meters over centuries, freed from a load it has carried since before humanity learned to shape stone. That rebound is already happening, slowly, in places where the ice has thinned. The Earth itself is rising from ancient compression. This alone is testimony to the unimaginable force bearing down on the rock below and to the pressure trapped, layer by layer, within the ice itself. And within that pressure, the voids exist like held breaths, rare, fragile, temporary. They are not empty in the human sense. They may hold compressed gases. They may hold trace warmth. They may hold nothing at all but absence pressed into shape by overwhelming force. But whatever they contain, their true significance is not their contents. It is their defiance. The fact that space can exist at all under such weight is an assertion written into the physics of the deep. That even under the heaviest burdens this planet can impose, matter still finds ways to bend without immediately breaking. At the surface, the sun wheels in a slow, endless arc during the austral summer, never quite setting, never quite rising. Light spills across the ice in unbroken days that last for months. In winter, darkness takes its place, equally complete. Yet beneath it all, far below the reach of light and season, the ice does not care whether the world above is bright or black. Pressure persists in both. Collapse is patient in both. What happens beneath Antarctica is not guided by calendar or clock. It is guided by accumulation, by gradient, by the relentless arithmetic of weight. Each year adds its thin line of burden. Each year deepens the equation that determines whether a layer will remain stable or yield into motion. Somewhere in that mathematics of stress and time, thresholds are crossed so slowly they appear eternal until one day they are not. The hidden cavities are not the goal of this process. They are the side effects of a system under continuous strain. They appear where the ice has been asked to do more than it can without changing its nature. They are born in the compromise between solidity and surrender, and they persist only as long as the surrounding forces allow them to. Above, humans move across the ice in vehicles that rattle against the cold. They drill, they measure, they map. Their footprints are erased within hours by the wind. Their buildings endure only by constant maintenance. Everything human here is temporary, but the pressure beneath is older than memory and more reliable than steel. It does not notice who stands above it. It only responds to what lies upon it. The silent continent continues to grow heavier. Storm by storm, year by year, the weight presses deeper into itself, and with that deepening weight, the hidden world grows more complex. The seeds of collapse are being planted even as new layers fall in quiet obedience to gravity. Somewhere in the dark interior, a space is forming that did not exist before. Somewhere else, a space that once endured is being erased, crushed back into crystal and stress. The pressure dome truly formed. It is already living on borrowed time. Its birth is not a triumph over gravity, but a brief negotiation with it. The surrounding ice is never at rest. It leans inward with a persistence that cannot be reshaped molecule by molecule in response to the hollow it encloses. The void does not resist with strength. It resists with balance. Balance beneath Antarctica is all temporary. Force acting on the ice is amplified by scale. A tiny deformation near the surface might mean nothing. At depth, that same deformation carries the weight of entire mountain ranges. The deeper the cavity, the greater the burden pressing against its fragile boundaries. The ice surrounding it is under so much compression that even small changes in temperature or flow rate ripple outward like earthquakes in slow motion. Yet no sound announces these changes. There is no collapse that can be heard from above. Only a quiet rearrangement of stress, a silent reconfiguration of what must give and what must hold. The void may persist for years. It may persist for centuries. It may vanish almost as soon as it is born. But while it exists, it becomes part of the deep machinery of the continent. It alters the way nearby ice bears weight. It redirects the slow rivers of frozen movement around it. It bends stress lines that have been forming for thousands of years. It is small in comparison to the immensity of Antarctica. Yet in a system governed by accumulation and imbalance, even small absences matter. There are places where the ice above shows faint signs of what happens below. Subtle surface depressions that do not match the expected flow of glaciers. Hairline fractures that appear and vanish with the seasons. Tiny accelerations in movement measured only by satellites that watch the same patch of ice year after year with merciless precision. These are not proofs. They are whispers. Suggestions that something beneath the visible world is shifting, reshaping, testing its limits. Antarctica keeps its secrets not by hiding them deliberately, but by overwhelming every attempt to fully observe them. The thickness of the ice is its shield. The cold protects not only the continent's surface, but its mysteries. Human presence here is too recent, too fragile, too brief to fully entangle itself with processes that unfold on timescales measured in tens of thousands of years. We arrive, we measure, we leave. The ice remains, carrying on with the slow mathematics of pressure that will continue long after our instruments fall silent. The silent continent is often described as dead, a frozen wasteland where nothing truly happens. But nothing could be further from the truth. Beneath the still surface, Antarctica is endlessly busy. Weight is constantly being reassigned. Stress is constantly being redistributed. The ice is always adjusting, always compensating, always deciding where it can afford to bend and where it must remain unbroken. The voids are one of the few indirect signatures of this hidden activity, rare moments where the internal life of the ice becomes faintly legible. Above, on the surface, a storm builds without warning. Snow thickens the air and erases the horizon. Wind scours the land until the boundary between sky and ground dissolves into a single white void. When the storm passes, a new layer has been added to the world tin, almost insignificant to the eye. Yet that layer joins the colossal ledger of weight that will never be deducted. It will sink. It will compress. It will become pressure. It will one day contribute to the same hidden instabilities being shaped far below. This is how Antarctica transforms, not through sudden change, but through relentless addition. Every year adds to the burden. Every burden deepens the stress. Every stress searches for a path of release. Sometimes that release is motion. Sometimes it is fracture. And sometimes, in the deepest darkness where no living thing has ever gone, it is space itself, brief, fragile, and doom-pressed into existence by the force that will eventually erase it. As the ice continues its slow descent toward the sea, carrying centuries of snowfall on its back, the internal world grows ever more complex. Layers slide over layers. Boundaries strain. Hidden cavities flirt with survival beneath kilometers of crushing weight. The continent appears unchanged from one human lifetime to the next. Yet inside, it is in constant negotiation with its own mass. And it is within this buried negotiation, this unseen struggle between accumulation and collapse, that the true story of Antarctica's hidden spaces begins to unfold. Far below the white silence that the world can see, far above this buried negotiation, the sky continues its indifferent rotation. Sunlight glances off the surface in blinding flashes, or disappears for months into polar night. The surface tells a story of extremes day without darkness. Darkness without end, but it is only a thin skin over a far deeper, slower narrative. Beneath that skin, the pressure has no seasons. It does not notice the return of light or the descent of winter. It only knows the mathematics of accumulation, written in kilometers of descending weight. The ice sheet grows not only by snowfall, but by memory. Each layer presses the memory of every layer below it deeper into confinement. The deeper a crystal is buried, the more it is forced to forget its original shape. Angles soften. Boundaries blur. What was once a clear, geometric lattice becomes a distorted compromise between rigidity and surrender. Under enough pressure, even the definition of a solid begins to feel like a suggestion rather than a law. In some regions, the lowest ice is pressed so hard that it behaves almost like honey in extreme cold, flowing imperceptibly around buried ridges of rock and through channels carved millions of years before the first snow ever fell here. These hidden landscapes beneath the ice-ancient mountain ranges drown valleys. Scarred plateaus act as scaffolding for the stresses above. The ice does not forget the terrain it covers. It conforms to it, argues with it, strains against it. Where the bedrock rises, stress builds. Where it falls away, the ice stretches and thins. In this silent argument between ice and stone, the conditions for instability are quietly assembled. Sometimes, pressure is relieved through flow. Glaciers accelerate, pouring their frozen mass toward the sea in vast, slow rivers. Sometimes it is relieved through fracture. Crevasses split the surface, exposing blue depths that swallow light. And sometimes, the relief takes a subtler form, internal rearrangement without any surface scar at all. A buried layer shifts. A plane of weakness yields. A hidden cavity opens briefly in a place no eye will ever see. These changes do not announce themselves with violence. They are measured in gradients and thresholds, not explosions. A difference of a few degrees. A change of a few centimeters per year. A redistribution of stress that no human body could feel, but that an entire ice sheet must obey. Over time, these minute adjustments accumulate into transformations vast enough to reshape continents and oceans alike. It is this quiet power that makes Antarctica deceptive. From afar, it seems static, locked in an eternal freeze. But the truth is closer to a slow-burning engine, turning over on timescales that dwarf civilizations. The ice sheet is not merely sitting on the continent. It is actively interacting with the planet beneath it, depressing the crust, altering gravity fields, steering atmospheric and oceanic currents through its sheer mass. The pressure that creates hidden voids is the same pressure that bends the Earth itself. Human history has unfolded during a moment when this balance seemed permanent. Coastlines appeared fixed. Sea levels rose and fell only slightly. The ice at the bottom of the world seemed untouchable by ordinary change. But the silence of Antarctica has always been a silence of slow motion, not of stasis. What appears unchanging across generations is, in truth, continuously adjusting at a pace too patient for daily notice. The hidden cavities are reminders of that truth. They are imperfections in what many imagine to be a flawless block of ice. They are transient spaces where the system momentarily fails to be uniform. And in any system governed by weight, imperfection is not an error, it is a signal. A signal that the forces at work are complex enough to create both structure and absence at the same time. Some cavities may collapse so gently that the surrounding ice absorbs the adjustment without a tremor. Others may release their imbalance through subtle icequakes vibrations, too faint to be felt at the surface, but strong enough to travel through kilometers of frozen mass. These tremors ripple outward and vanish, their energy dissipated into a vast, cold body that remembers stress more readily than it remembers motion. If one could stand inside such a hidden dome at the instant of its failure, there would be no warning, no sound in the human sense, no light to change. Only the sudden, irresistible inward motion of the walls as gravity reasserts its claim. Space would be erased not violently, but completely. What was hollow would become solid once again, its brief defiance folded back into the anonymous density of the ice. And yet, even as some voids are erased, others are being formed. The system never rests long enough to settle into uniformity. Accumulation continues. Heat continues to rise from the planet's interior. Ice continues to flow under its own weight toward the margins where it will eventually meet the ocean and vanish into liquid memory. In this endless circulation, imbalance is not a rare event. It is inevitable. From the perspective of a single human lifetime, Antarctica appears unchanging. From the perspective of the ice itself, a human lifetime is scarcely a pause between shifts. Pressure domes may form and collapse within spans we interpret as ancient history. Yet to the deep ice, they are only fleeting episodes in a much longer story of compression and release. And so the silent continent carries on, building and dismantling its hidden spaces in perfect secrecy. Above, the world debates what can be seen: melting edges, retreating glaciers, calving icebergs. Below, beyond every camera and every footstep, the greater mass of Antarctica continues to negotiate its own weight, shaping voids not as anomalies, but as quiet necessities of a world built on pressure alone. The existence of hidden space beneath such overwhelming mass challenges the simplest assumptions about solidity. We imagine ice as an unyielding monolith, an eternal shield of cold. But Antarctica teaches a harsher, stranger lesson, that even the most rigid materials surrender when time is long enough and weight is great enough. Here, solidity is not a guarantee. It is a temporary arrangement under negotiation with gravity. Far below the surface, the pressure is so intense that the boundaries between individual crystals blur into a mosaic of resistance and glide. Ice grains rotate, slide past one another, fuse, separate, and rejoin in new orientations. The structure is never fixed. It is always becoming something else. In such a shifting lattice, Weakness is not an exception. It is an emergent property. And wherever weakness accumulates, space has a chance to be born. Some scientists believe that many of these cavities never grow large enough to be distinguished as true domes. They flicker into existence at microscopic scales, open for moments in a storm that adds a snow layer today may influence the fate of a void kilometers below decades from now. A warming ocean at the acid. Every of pressure. As the the ice. They are not vast cathedrals waiting to be discovered. They are fleeting deformities. for human sense to detect, is a signal of profound activity below. The hidden domes, while fleeting, affect this surface indirectly, influencing how stress is distributed across vast distances. They are a component in the system that shapes the ice sheet and, by extension, global sea levels. Seismic surveys reveal the contours of these buried spaces, radar eruptions, and layering. Even with advanced technology, knowledge remains incomplete. Antarctica's interior is so vast, so pressurized, and so layered that certain is impossible. What scientists interpret as may only fleeting micro-collapse. Each dome is absorbed by surrounding. Between recent layers imperceptible to the surface become magnified under or a softer, less dense layer yields first, creating a small but vital space to adapt. Over decades or centuries, these minute adjustments influence the dynamic of the entire continent. In the brief cavity part in this planetary scale choreography, quietly contributing to the long stability of the sheet, while shaping behavior in ways that humans are only beginning to understand. Temperature gradients amplify these effects. Heat from the Earth's interior softens basal ice, creating zones more susceptible to flow and deformation. Surface layers remain cold and rigid, constraining the motion above. Between these extremes, stress concentrates where soft meets hard, warm meets cold. These boundaries become prime locations for the formation of hidden voids, ephemeral spaces where the ice is forced to accommodate pressure without breaking. Here, small fluctuations in flow or heat can determine whether a cavity survives for decades or collapses within years. Observation is limited but reveals Stress redistribution deep in the ice affects the timing of cavity events, impacting distant coastlines. Hidden cavities world. They form where layers of ice slide past one another under differential stress, concentrating force along narrow planes. Within these zones, the ice is more flexible and more likely to allow the formation of cavities. The hidden domes often originate here, where the latter can yield without catastrophic failure. Each shear zone is both a conduit and a regulator, distributing stress and guiding the slow, deliberate flow of the continent's frozen mass. Basal conditions further complicate the internal architecture. The interface between ice and bedrock is rarely uniform. Subglacial mountains, valleys, and irregularities influence flow patterns and stress distribution. Where ice encounters these hidden obstacles, pressure concentrates, crystals deform, and voids may emerge. These basal features, unseen from above, play a decisive role in shaping the internal structure of Antarctica, providing both resistance and pathways for adjustment. The continent's hidden domes are, in many ways, a response to this buried topography. Even minor changes at the surface propagate downward over centuries. A snowfall that seems trivial can add measurable pressure to underlying layers, subtly altering stress distributions and influencing the fate of cavities deep below. Conversely, melting at the edges or calving events can relieve pressure, reshaping the equilibrium in the interior. The ice sheet behaves as a single, interconnected system. Every addition, subtraction, or shift contributes to its continuous negotiation with gravity and weight. Seismic activity, while rare, can also influence hidden spaces. Icequakes release sudden bursts of energy, propagating stress waves that interact with existing voids and microfractures. These events may reinforce or destabilize cavities, altering the internal balance. Over centuries, repeated stress pulses contribute to the gradual evolution of the hidden architecture, ensuring the ice remains adaptable while carrying an immense, continuous load. Observation of these phenomena relies on ingenuity. Radar signals, seismic arrays, and satellite altimetry provide indirect glimpses, but each method has limitations. Radar penetrates only so far. Reflections can be ambiguous, and surface motion can be caused by multiple subsurface processes. Scientists must interpret these faint signals cautiously, combining multiple data sources with modeling to infer the presence and behavior of hidden domes. Even then, much of Antarctica's interior remains a realm of educated hypothesis, a silent world operating beyond direct human observation. Timescales redefine perception. What humans experience as decades or centuries is a mere fraction of the processes governing the ice. Cavities may persist for centuries before collapse or vanish in a geological instant. Each void is a momentary adjustment in a system that has been negotiating weight for millions of years. The ice retains memory of each stress, displacement, and imperfection, and the hidden spaces serve as transient indicators of this ongoing adaptation. Despite their invisibility, hidden domes are functional components of the ice sheet. They redistribute stress, guide flow, and contribute to stability. Without these ephemeral cavities, pressure might accumulate unchecked, risking larger-scale fractures or accelerated flow. They are subtle, temporary solutions that allow the continent to endure under forces that would crush most other materials. Antarctica's resilience emerges not from rigidity, but from this delicate interplay of impermanence and adaptation. Above, the surface is serene and deceptive. Blizzards sweep across the plains. Glaciers advance imperceptibly, and the ice appears static. Yet beneath this calm, a hidden architecture evolves continually. Cavities form and collapse, stress redistributes, and the ice negotiates with gravity, temperature, and time. The continent survives not by resisting change, but by embracing it, allowing space to exist briefly where forces demand it. And so, in the darkness beneath kilometers of ice, Antarctica continues its patient, silent work. Gravity presses, ice flows, shear zones bend, basal irregularities influence, cavities appear and vanish, and the continent endures. Stability is maintained not through immobility, but through the quiet, continuous adaptation of matter under unimaginable pressure. Beneath Antarctica's frozen expanse, hidden spaces form and vanish like fleeting breaths within a solid mass. These cavities, pressure domes, voids, and transient hollows are not merely accidents of structure. They are the ice sheet's method of negotiating its immense weight. Every meter of ice above presses downward with billions of tons. Yet within this immense compression, space persists, defying intuition. These ephemeral structures are born from imbalance, maintained by subtle interactions of stress, temperature, and flow, and erased when the equilibrium shifts. Their existence is a testament to the continent's silent intelligence, an ongoing negotiation that ensures stability amidst the most extreme pressures on Earth. The formation of a pressure dome begins where forces converge in just the right way. Layers of ice under immense weight deform slowly, distributing stress along planes of weakness. Crystals rotate, realign, and shift under compression, creating minute pockets where space can exist temporarily. Shear zones, basal irregularities, and subtle variations in temperature all contribute to the conditions necessary for a cavity to survive. These spaces are fragile, yet they play a critical role. By allowing pressure to be absorbed locally, they prevent catastrophic fractures and maintain the continent's overall integrity. Temperature, modest in variation, exerts an outsized influence. Geothermal soften basal ice, reduce viscosity. can alter vast distances. The ice, all its weight and depth, is to negotiate these worlds in one place to maintain integrity in another, preserving stability across a larger. Any single human imagination can fully grasp. Even as human technology improves, much of Antarctica's interior remains a mystery. We can infer the presence of hidden bones, predict they are